listening to Your Secret is Safe with Me, non-judgmental talk about infidelity with Dr. Marie Murphy. If you're looking for new perspectives on complicated relationship issues, you've come to the right place.
Days go by, they're crawling by.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Marie Murphy. This podcast is all about expanding the conversation around infidelity. I'm a relationship coach, and I specialize in helping people who are dealing with infidelity make decisions about how to move forward that are truly right for them. On this show, we feature tools and guidance from my coaching practice, as well as advice from other professionals whose work pertains to the sometimes complicated business of human romantic relationships. Today, I have the pleasure of talking with Dr. Tammy Nelson. Dr. Tammy is a sex and relationship expert, an international speaker, an author, and a licensed psychotherapist with almost 30 years of experience working with individuals and couples. In private practice, she focuses on helping people of all ages, orientations, and genders find love, healing, and passion. She is a TEDx speaker, host of the podcast The Trouble with Sex, and the author of many books, including When You're the One Who Cheats, 10 Things You Need to Know, and The New Monogamy, Redefining Your Relationship After Infidelity. To learn more about Dr. Tammy and her work, go to drtammynelson.com. Before we get to our conversation today, this episode is brought to you by me, Marie Murphy, PhD. I provide shame-free, blame-free, non-judgmental relationship coaching. You can talk to me about the things that seem too messy or weird or stigmatized to share with your best friend or your spouse or even your therapist, including but not limited to matters related to infidelity. To learn more about my relationship coaching practice or to schedule an introductory coaching session with me, go to mariemurphyphd.com. All right, Dr. Tammy, it's great to have you here.
Oh, hi, Marie. Thanks so much for having me.
My pleasure. Let's talk about why having an affair can be such an exhilarating experience and why it feels so amazing.
Well, I mean, if you've ever had an affair, you know that the whole experience is based on something illicit, forbidden, naughty, and that in and of itself is erotic. You know, the whole experience of eroticism is that it's illicit, forbidden, naughty, exciting. You know, the whole experience of doing something secret, sneaking around, creates an excitement in and of itself. It's sort of the opposite of being in a safe, contained, familiar relationship. So that idea of doing something bad, it can be really attractive, especially, and I have to talk about it in terms of where we've been for the past year, and especially in terms of being in a pandemic where we're overly safe and overly stuck in our daily routine where we're not getting out much, and we might crave some adventure, something out of the norm, out of the ordinary. And so it makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. Let's talk about the brain chemicals associated with excitement and danger and lust and eroticism.
Well, you do get, a bath of brain chemicals that are released when you do something that is adventurous, but also is dangerous. So you get, a heightened chemical response from something that is not only dangerous and illicit, but something that's sexual. And also when you have an intense attraction for something. And, many of us have brains that are focused on seeking behavior. In your midbrain, you have a section of your brain that's focused on seeking. And some of us have more of a craving for those seeking chemicals. Other people are more comfortable with nesting behavior, which has to do with a different set of brain chemicals. And so it's sort of like if you're home right now in the pandemic and sort of the lockdown mode, you might be really happy like making sourdough bread. Like that's really your gig, and you cleaned out your closets and redecorated, and you're okay with it. Other people are frustrated by their seeking behaviors because there's no place to go to a movie to look for a parking space, to find a restaurant. That normal seeking behavior might be frustrated. And so you're looking for that rush of brain chemicals, maybe online, like on a cheating dating website, or you're looking at social media for an old girlfriend or boyfriend. And those seeking behaviors are really about looking for that rush in your brain, looking for that high that you might get from, frankly, looking for a Netflix movie that you didn't know you haven't seen. And I mean, come on, haven't we all seen everything on Netflix by now? So sick of TV.
Everything that we're willing to watch anyway.
Oh, God, I know. It's true.
Just a note for our listeners. So we're recording this in February 2021, and many of us have been like at home for a good 11 months now. And that's getting to be a stretch.
It's so true. And I know I'm dating this, so, people might be listening to this years from now, and hopefully you're all healthy and well beyond this. And you think back to this time either fondly or with a horrible nightmarish memory.
Or both. Yeah. No, but I mean, one of the things that I think is so interesting about the pandemic situation is that it kind of exacerbates tendencies that we already have, right?
True.
So,
Very true.
A lot of the stresses that I see people talking about in their relationships were already present prior to the pandemic, but the pandemic conditions have really just sort of concentrated them and brought them to a point where it's really hard to avoid the difficulties in the relationship.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Let's talk about like the rush of brain chemicals and how they can impact our perception of a situation. Like, let's say I am really into seeking behaviors, and that's where I get, a lot of my satisfaction, if you will, in life. And I start having an affair and it feels amazing. And I start to think that, well, maybe, this affair partner is the one, and I need to, do everything I can to pursue them, get them, and just start a new life with them. What do you say to folks in that kind of a situation?
Well, new relationship energy, whether it's an affair or someone that you're just dating, is, really hard to beat. Like, it's like a drug. If we could bottle it and sell it, we'd be rich. I mean,
Right.
there's nothing to compare it to. So, the reality is it only lasts anywhere from 3 months to 27 months. I think Helen Fisher put people in an MRI machine and compared that new relationship energy to the same thing that happens in your brain when you're high on cocaine. Like, the same parts of your brain light up when you're newly in love that light up when you're high on coke. So your brain can't sustain that level of intensity for longer than that, or just burn out.
Right.
And so eventually it's going to go away, but you can't convince someone when they're in that new phase that, oh, by the way, this is going to go away, so don't compare this to your spouse or to your current primary partner, because they're going to say, well, I'm going to ride this out. Like, this feels great.
Right.
And it does. It feels wonderful. So, but it's hard to make a decision about whether this person is actually a real long-term potential partner until you get past that phase and you can sort of pull down the mask and look at, is this a potential partner for a long-term committed partnership? Because you don't really know. And the issue with affairs is that you don't usually spend enough time to have that part of the relationship sort of wear off to judge what's real and what isn't. And so it's confusing for a lot of people, because if you have the potential of dragging out that part of your relationship with the confusing part of the relationship, which is usually the longing and the forbidden part. Oh, we shouldn't be together. We should break up. This isn't right. Okay, let's not see each other. Oh, now I miss you. Now I really want to be with you. My partner found out. We have to stop. So I really don't want to do it. But now the fact that I can't do it makes me want to do it more. All that creates more of that sort of new relationship feeling, which is not really the reality of a relationship. And so
yeah,
it's hard. You can't compare apples and oranges. And That's why a lot of people have affairs to stay in their marriage, because it feels like, oh, I want both of these things. I want a long-term partner because it feels safe and secure, and I love them, and it's a commitment, and it's family, and it's wonderful. But I also want this other really fun intensity that feels really sexy and makes me feel alive. And, to be fair, it's not so much about the outside partner. It's not so much that you look for an outside partner. You don't really necessarily look for a certain person. You look to be a certain person.
I love that. Yeah,
you're really looking to be someone else. So you become this person in your marriage or committed partnership, and then you're looking to become this other person outside of your marriage. And that's really hard to give up. It's not so much about, with all due respect to the outside partner, because I've been the outside partner, it's really, that person's a real person and they do exist, but it's more about who you are when you're with that person. That's really hard to give up. That's really hard to say, okay, I'm going to end this affair, and I'm just going to grieve that I'm never going to be that smart, sexy, intelligent, charming person ever again. I'm just going to go home and try to fit myself back into the marriage box and blame my partner that I can never be that again. Like, that's a drag.
Right. 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 Two things that I wanted to riff off of that you just said is, one is, when you're trying to evaluate what's going on with you and your affair partner, the thing that's missing is the tyranny of the everyday. And if you think you want to have like a long-term relationship with this person, but you're not doing any of the things that you would do with a long-term companion or a long-term partner, it's hard to make a decision of like, what does it feel like being on cocaine versus what does it feel like doing the laundry? It's not, and the conundrum that I see people in is that they kind of know this sometimes on the one hand, but on the other hand, there's no way to really get out of that trap and experience what it's like to just do the laundry with someone.
Right, exactly. And, the reality is, sometimes marriages have an expiration date. It might be that, you are trying to swing from branch to branch. Sometimes affairs are a can opener. They're a way to get out of the relationship.
Right. For sure.
So it may be that you are looking for someone or an excuse to get out or to trade your partner in for someone else. And you think, okay, I want to trade up, and that may be true. It may also be that you're trying to wake up your marriage, or wake up your relationship, wake up your partner to say, look, I want something else and you're not paying attention, and let me show you what I want. And, we're either going to wake this relationship up or we're going to break up.
Yeah.
And that's a harsh way of doing it, but sometimes people have gotten to the end of their rope and they don't know how else to do it.
True. And I think a layer of that, or sometimes a separate component of it, is sometimes people are trying to wake up their relationship with themselves. And it's not, right. It's not all about their primary partner or their spouse. It's about like feeling kind of dead or dormant within themselves. And then they meet this person and they feel sparkly and alive and amazing. And it's like, oh, this is the solution, when the solution may, at a deeper level, be about their relationship with them.
Oh, I totally agree. And, there have been times when it's, bringing that awake and alive person back into the marriage has helped the marriage, has helped the relationship. But it's hard to tell someone that who's been cheated on, like, oh no, this is going to be good for you. This is going to be great. You're going to love it.
Right. Yeah. Let's talk about that a little bit more. How do you see that playing out in couples that you've worked with?
Well, there's really 3 phases of recovery. There's like the crisis phase, when there's been discovery or disclosure, when people are out of their minds and everything's falling apart. But then if people stay in therapy for long enough, there's the insight phase, where they sort of figure out like what was going on with us, like how did all this happen, which is where they do this deeper work that you're talking about. Like, was I trying to wake up to a part of myself? Was it really about our relationship, or were we perfectly happy and it was just about me? Like, what was really going on? Was I trying to get you to break up with me? What was really happening? They do deeper work. And then in the third phase, which is usually a little bit shorter, is really the vision phase. That's the phase where you decide, okay, if we're going to stay together, we have to have a whole new relationship. Like you cannot go back to the way things were. You can create a whole new marriage or a whole new committed partnership, but you cannot go back to the way things were because you're just going to end up here again, right? There's got to be a whole new beginning and a whole new sort of, jump start to your relationship if you're going to make it work.
I love that. That I think, and I think that scares the shit out of people.
It does, but it's also a relief because
Right.
I think people come in thinking, if we could just go back to the way things were, and it's hard to put yourself back, hard to put the genie back in the bottle. Like it's so frustrating. And it probably wasn't working that great before this happened. And so the frustration and the depression of that is suddenly lifted like, oh, we don't have to do that. Like we can have something totally new that maybe works for both of us. Like there's a relief in that.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot of work, but it's definitely like, I see people just go, oh, thank God.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. When you're willing to accept change, that all of the weight of resisting change starts to float away.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And
Talk about
and people have hope too, hope for the future.
hope. Yes, absolutely. That's something that we all depend on for sure.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about your concept of the new monogamy and how couples who have navigated infidelity or are navigating infidelity can move forward and think about monogamy in a new way?
Well, the bad news is that once you have an affair, your monogamy agreement's over, right? I mean, let's just talk about a married couple. Like pretty much the only thing they need to do is not cheat. That's the only rule. And you pretty much know that. Like it's not like it's a secret. That's what you agreed to. I mean, that's like the implicit and explicit expectation. Like just don't cheat on me. We'll be okay. We'll figure everything else out. So once you cheat, and you pretty much know you're going to do it, like unless you get roofied, which in that case you should, go to the hospital and call a lawyer, or you're so drunk you don't remember how you ended up in bed with someone, in which case you should probably go to therapy or go to rehab. In all other cases, you pretty much knew you were going to do it. There's some pre-existing contemplation. And so you knew you were going to cross that monogamy boundary. And so your monogamy is over. Like that contract is broken. And so your marriage is ostensibly over. Like that's the only monogamy means to be legally married. That's the definition of monogamy. And so we sort of intertwine it with sexual fidelity, but the reality is that's the only obligation that we have around monogamy. And so once that's over, the bad news is, yes, your marriage, as you know, it is over. That's not the vision you had of how it was going to turn out. Like you probably had an idea of how you were going to grow old together or rock on the front porch or what your end zone was going to look like. And it probably wasn't this. And so you have to draw a line in the sand and grieve what you thought your relationship was going to look like. And then, and only then, can you decide what your new relationship or your new monogamy is going to look like. If you decide to start over and reboot and have something new, but that new monogamy has got to be something that the two of you decide on together, two or more, if there's more of you in your relationship. But you have to decide what it's going to look like. It can't be this implicit assumption around monogamy that you did the first time. It was probably based on what your parents said or your church or your synagogue or your community, your culture. A lot of monogamy agreements are these explicit vows that we make that are kind of, quaint and comforting, but they don't really apply to what we really want. We say them because it feels good in the moment, but now this time you have to say something that really applies. When you get married, you don't say, I promise to love, honor you, and tell you about every Instagram friend I have. Like now you might have to do that. Well, now you probably do have to do that. Like now this new monogamy, you're going to have to make a lot of decisions about What do we talk about? Do we tell each other every time we masturbate in the shower? Do we tell each other every time we look at porn? Do we tell each other every time we have a friend where we share personal stuff about our sex life? Like, what is not?
Mm-hmm. Right.
This is a whole new conversation about what your relationship is going to look like going forward. And it doesn't mean you have to have an open relationship, but you have to be open about what your expectations are so that everything that's implicit is now X. Because if you don't, then that's what leads to betrayal. When you think, wait a minute, this is not what I thought was going to happen. When anything that starts with that conversation, you're in big trouble.
For sure. For sure. And, it's really interesting. Like, I talk to so many people who are quote unquote younger and talking about like dating in this day and age with all of the various options that are out there. And everybody's, kind of grown up with this plethora of options that weren't available, say 20, 25 years ago, et cetera. And, one thing that's really struck me is folks who are dating and forming relationships saying how important it is, especially in the context of social media and all of the devices that we're plugged into every second of the day, how important it is to talk to people that you're dating and getting to know and enjoy about what their expectations are around the relationship's parameters.
Totally. And I think there's the difference between wanting a more fluid relationship agreement and having attachment issues where you're just afraid to commit. And I think that's an important thing that you have to figure out and discuss before you get into a committed relationship. Because saying you want an open relationship isn't an excuse to continue an affair or to continue cheating or to do whatever the hell you want because you're afraid to get attached to someone. There's a whole, we could do a whole podcast on just that.
Sure. Oh, for sure. And all of the consensual non-monogamy folks would say that, consensual non-monogamies are not the same thing as just doing whatever you want and being able to,
Exactly.
Engage in like varying layers of levels of honesty or dishonesty on your own whims.
Yeah, it's a lot of work.
Right. Polyamory is an endless conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. This is a great segue into the topic of lying, which I think is so rich and important. If you're having an affair or you've had an affair and your spouse or your partner confronts you, why is it so tempting and perhaps common to deny the whole thing?
Well, I think for the most part, people lie initially because they're trying to protect their partner. And I think people need to know that. It's not that they wake up in the morning and say, I want to hurt my partner today. So I'm going to, lie and cheat and try to hurt them. If they do, then that's pathological and that's a whole nother problem. But for the most part, if you're in a relationship with someone that cares about you, and it's just, acting on their own selfish behalf, for the most part, people lie to protect themselves, but also to protect their partner. And we have this, lizard brain response when we're confronted. Depending on what happened in your own childhood, we have this brainstem response, which is, the prefrontal cortex is your front of your brain, it's like your forehead. And then there's this brainstem response, which is the back of your head, the back of your brain, which is your old brain, which is basically what reacts when you're in fight, flight, or freeze. And there's also another response, which I call the fawning response.
Say that again?
So it's the fawning response, like when you fawn over someone.
Okay.
It's like see these women who are like, oh my God, you're so wonderful. I just really think you're the most amazing president. I've just never seen anyone like you. You're incredible. And I just love everything you say. And then they back slowly out of the room. It's like when people have been traumatized or grown up with abusive parents, sometimes the fawning response gets them out of the room long enough to escape. And they don't even realize that they're doing it. But that's also a lizard brain response. So the fight response is when someone confronts you and says, I found your email. And they're like, I don't know what you're talking about. That's not mine. you're full of it. Like, I didn't even write that email. What are you doing on my phone anyway? I can't believe you're going, you invaded my privacy. Like, that's a fight response.
Right.
A flight response is they grab their phone and run out of the room, disappear for 2 days. And a freeze response is where they look at you and they don't talk and they stare at you like a doe in the headlights with drool coming out of their mouth, and they just hope you'll go away and stop talking to them. And all of those responses are, almost uncontrollable. They're like they're really just neurological responses to fear, and that fear, can get triggered when they feel shame or when they're afraid. Oh my God, you're going to abandon me if I tell you the truth, you're going to leave me. And so it's a feeling of being trapped, and that it takes a while for people to realize, okay, I can tell the truth and I'll get through it. Even if I lose you, I'll be okay, or this is the right thing to do, or it's important for me to act in integrity regardless of the consequences. So all those decisions are prefrontal cortex decisions. Those are like in your frontal lobe, and we have to get through those panic responses in order to make those decisions.
Yeah. What do you see in couples where somebody has, initially had like a big lizard brain response and has lied about their cheating, and then, for whatever reasons, it's come out that in fact they were lying. Not only have they been cheating, they lied about it initially, and now they're trying to sort things out. I see some interesting dynamics on the other person's end, but tell me about what you see when you work with couples in that kind of a situation.
You mean what happens when they try to come out of a long-term dishonest situation?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, if people have been lying for a long time, what happens is sometimes people dribble out the truth. So they gaslight their partner by saying, I don't know what you're talking about. That's not my email. And their partner will say, but it has your name on it. And they're like, yeah, but somebody must have stolen my email. I don't know what you're
right.
Well, you're calling your affair partner by the same nickname you call me. Yeah, but they must have copied it. Like,
right.
That's gaslighting.
Yeah.
And that can be harder to recover from. An affair has 3 parts. It's the outside relationship with someone, it's the sex, some kind of sexual relationship, and it's the dishonesty. And for the person who's been cheated on, statistically, it's harder to get over the dishonesty. And it depends on what kind of dishonesty it is. So if you've been gaslighted and tried, your partner tries to make you feel crazy, it's really hard to deal with that and to come back from that. If it's, a quick lie to cover up something that happened because you've been confronted and you're scrambling to figure out what to say, and then you come back and make amends and say, I lied, I was afraid, this is the truth. The quicker you come back from it, the more likely your partner will be able to get past it. There's like a whole continuum of dishonesty.
Right.
So it depends on which part you lie about, and it depends on how long you lie for, and it depends on what kind of dishonesty is going on in your relationship and how repetitive it is. Sometimes people lie about an affair and say it's over, it's never going to happen again. And then, I see people who repeat over and over and over their affairs, and there's only so much a partner can take, which is, what they should. They shouldn't continue in a relationship with their partners repetitively cheating.
Yeah. What I see sometimes is that the person who is being repetitively cheated on, is trying so hard to be compassionate and understanding of their spouse or partner's behavior. And on the one hand, I think it's important for us to understand, the reasons, the very human reasons why people lie. But on the other hand, I certainly teach people that it's important to figure out where your boundaries are and to learn how to honor those and to work through the fears that may be preventing you from setting and honoring boundaries.
And, a lot of people who are overly forgiving have grown up in families where there's been affairs.
Yep.
And that may be partly why, it feels familiar. There's a statistic that says that if you've been a cheater or if you've been cheated on, there's a 70% likelihood that your parents had an affair.
Mm.
And even if you don't know about it.
Mm. Oh, wow. Gosh, I wonder what that study design looked like.
I know. And I would encourage people not to jump to conclusions and go running home to their parents.
Yeah.
Okay, which one of you cheated?
Yeah.
But I also think, there is a cycle. There's like a trauma triangle of a victim, perpetrator, rescuer, where it's easy to get sucked into that. Like you can feel like the victim, and then you can also become the rescuer of your partner. Like, it's okay, he didn't mean it. She was in a bad place. Like, you can switch around, and then you can become the perpetrator where you're, really abusive to your partner who cheated. So if that happens, if you find yourself in that victim, perpetrator, rescuer triangle, it's likely that you have been traumatized in your own past and you're just repeating a cycle that you might be stuck in.
Yeah.
And maybe being attracted to someone who is somewhat abusive in their cheating on you is something that you are repeating from your own past. And that's something that you really need to work out in therapy.
Yeah.
Because the likelihood is you're not going to escape from this pattern without some good insight work.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. The things we cling to because they're familiar, even if they are so uncomfortable in their familiarity.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. All right. Let's talk about some important things to keep in mind if you're currently cheating or if you've cheated. What are your key bullet points for folks in this situation?
Well, I would say number one, don't blame your partner for the fact that you're cheating. It's not that your partner isn't giving you enough sex or they're not giving you enough attention or, fill in the blank. Like, I think you have to take responsibility for the fact that you're the one that's cheating and own it. And it's nobody else's fault but yours. And so stop justifying or making an excuse. And also don't minimize it. Like, I don't know why you're so upset. It was only one night, or I never slept with them, or it didn't mean anything to me, or I wasn't emotionally involved, or I didn't love them. Like, don't minimize the impact that it has on your partner. And then number three, I think it's important to be clear about what you want once your partner finds out, for both your affair partner and your current partner, so that you don't wait around for other people to make decisions for you. Your affair partner is like a real person, and that there's fallout from this that affects them as well as your spouse. Like, what you're doing affects a lot of people. There's probably a wide swath of people that are affected by this behavior. So you have to take responsibility for that and be clear about what you want. If the truth is, look, I don't want to stop this affair, then be clear about it. Don't go home and tell your spouse, I swear I'm never going to see them again, because it's not fair to anybody. If you tell your affair partner, I'm going to go home and work on my marriage, but then you call them every day and say, I really miss you, I can't wait to see you again, let's just meet one more time, then that's not fair to anyone either. So I think you have to be really clear about what you want. And if you don't know, that's fair too, but maybe see a therapist and try to figure that out, or a coach.
Right.
And try to be clearer about what you really do want and how you got yourself into this. Like, what is the message, the narrative behind what you want?
Yeah.
One thing that helps is to write a list, like write 10 things down about what you really want in the relationship, and 10 things about what you want in your life in the next 5 years. And those two lists, you'll find some overlap, and you might get some clarity about what you want. So the 10 things that you really want in a relationship and 10 things that you really want in your life in the next 5 years. I find that is a helpful exercise for anybody, whether they're the cheater or the person being cheated on.
I totally agree. And I actually give that sort of advice to folks who aren't sure about their relationship, whether they should commit to someone or break up with someone or whatever, or if they're kind of looking for a partner and they aren't having much success with it. Figuring out what you want in the context of your life as a whole and what's really important to you, I think is such an important framing device for any questions about what you want out of your romantic partnerships.
Exactly. I
Yeah.
agree.
Tammy, it's been amazing talking with you. I'd love to ask you one last question. Can you tell us about a time when you've been unfaithful to someone, maybe yourself, maybe someone else, or to something?
Yeah. So I had an affair with someone who was married. It was after I was divorced from my first husband. So I was single. I was a single parent. I had 2 young kids, and he was married, and he sort of swept me off my feet in a time when I was really struggling. I remember sitting on my back porch and thinking I didn't know how to change the gas tank on my gas grill because my ex-husband had always done it, and I felt so incompetent and lonely. And this guy came along who was really super smart, really successful in his life, and really helped me with a lot of things, helped me sort of get my life together. And he was mad in love with me and swore he was going to leave his wife. And we had amazing, exciting sex. But the more we were together, the more I realized that, I really didn't want to leave his wife and move in with me, and that I wasn't ready for that, and it wasn't the right time in my life. And frankly, I never knew his wife. And then I went to a class, and she was in the class, and I met her. And it sort of changed the whole game for me. And I realized that once she was a real person, and I couldn't sort of deny the fact that I was affecting other people's lives. But even then I continued with that affair because I thought, well, I'm not the one that's married. It's his responsibility to figure out his life, and I sort of justified it in that way. But then she found a phone call from me on his phone, and he told her that we were just emotionally involved, that we weren't sexually involved, and he denied the whole thing. And that sort of crushed me. Like, they went to therapy to discuss his emotional affair, and I was so angry and hurt. And I used that as an excuse to break up with him. I was like, okay, that's enough. And so, and also my ex-husband had an affair with my best friend at the time. And I realized years and years and years later, that's not why we broke up. But I'm going to be honest, I'll tell you this just real quick story about it. I was at a conference speaking. I speak all over the world, as I did before the pandemic. Now it's on Zoom, about affairs and relationships. And it was probably 7 or 8 years after my divorce. And I was standing in front of a room of 200 people talking about affair recovery. And I was talking about collusion and how we sometimes unconsciously collude with our partner's affairs. And it's really hard to talk to people about that because it sounds like you're blaming the victim. And I started to tell the story of my husband's affair and how my best friend was really beautiful. And I would tell her all about my problems with my husband and how we were struggling. And she said, "Oh, I'll take care of him." And I ignored that whole joke. And I was like, yeah, whatever. But then I realized as I was talking, I really did push them together. Like, she would call and I'd be like, oh, I'm too busy with the kids. Here, you talk to her. And I pushed them together unconsciously. And they did start an affair. And I realized standing there that I pushed them together because I knew on some level that I was going to leave him. And I wanted him to know that some beautiful woman was going to want him, so that it wouldn't be so crushing when I told him I wanted to divorce.
Fascinating. Yeah.
And it was fascinating because I had no conscious idea that that's what I was doing. It wasn't until almost a decade later that I was like, of course that's what I was doing. How obvious is it now that that's what I did? And if you had told me at the time that I was participating in that, I would have been so angry and so righteously upset. Yeah. Because I held on to that so hard about, like, he cheated on me and my best friend. I never talked to her after that. And I was like, it felt so good to be so angry reality.
Sure. Yeah.
So I've seen it and experienced it and felt it from a lot of different angles.
Yeah.
And so I have a lot of empathy for people. I don't think affairs are so clear cut. I think there's a lot of reasons that they happen. There's a lot of ways that it can happen, and there's a lot of ways that people can heal. And I've seen, hundreds and hundreds of couples who have said to me afterwards, maybe this was the best thing that could have happened to us.
Sure.
People stay together and move on, and sometimes they move on and split up. And sometimes, sometimes it's a blessing. Sometimes it's painful as hell, and it takes years and years and years to get over it. And I am in a second marriage now, and I'm super happy. We've been together for a long time.
Yeah.
And who's to say?
Right. Who's to say? One of the things that I think is important is to, recognize that all of our lives are going to have these inflection points and these moments of challenge that are opportunities for clarification and renewal or rebirth, if you will. And it may or may not come in the form of an affair. It may or may not come in the form of a relationship challenge. But on the one hand, it's about like the cheating and the relationship. And on the other hand, it's also just about, being human and the fact that all sorts of stuff happens to us. The point of coming into this incarnation is not to have this sort of like linear course or this, like smooth runway up to like success and fame and fortune and happiness and everything being perfect all the time.
No. Disappointing.
Well, on that note, would you tell everyone how to find you and if there's anything you're currently offering that you want folks to know about?
Sure. They can go to drtammynelson.com. It's DrTammy Nelson.com. I have a podcast as well called The Trouble with Sex, anywhere podcasts are found. And I'm also always offer online sessions. If you want to get in touch with me and find out more information, they can find my books on Amazon or through my website.
Wonderful. Thanks again for joining me today, Tammy. It's been a pleasure talking with you.
Thanks, Marie. Thanks for the invite.
Awesome. Well, thanks to everyone who's been listening. And if you enjoyed what you heard today, we hope you'll head on over to iTunes to rate and review the show. We'll see you next time. Bye for now.
Thanks for listening to Your Secret is Safe with Me with Dr. Marie Murphy. Make sure to click subscribe to get updates on our latest episodes.